This is an update on developments in Numbas over the past year since the last EAMS. I said something after the last EAMS. I said in the coming year I'm going to focus less on developing new features in Numbas and more on organising the content we've already got. We've got absolutely tons of content. Some of it's hard to find and some of it needs a bit more attention to make it as good as it could be. And that went somewhat well, not so much. So I'll start with some stats on the general state of Numbas around the world. So these are some stats pulled from the Numbas editor at Math Centre. We've just passed 100,000 questions written in the database, which is a nice milestone. There's almost 10,000 of those are published for anyone to use. We have around 8,000 registered users from roughly 1,500 institutions. That's measured just by looking at the ends of domain names. So a few underwhelming stats about the community, maybe. The runtime has been translated into 18 languages, which is really impressive. It means that Numbas is being used around the world. There have been 20 pull requests on the various GitHub repositories in the last year. That's encouraging. It means that other people are contributing to the Numbas code, and that's something I've always wanted to encourage. And I found around about a dozen papers mentioning Numbas. I don't have any impulse to publish, but it's nice to see that other people do. We ran a user meeting this spring in May, gathering Numbas users from around the world. We ran that through GatherTown. That was a lot of fun. We had around about 20 talks from a variety of people and lots of discussions about how Numbas should work and doing more stuff, organising the community of users. The LTI tool, we released version 3. There are no massive functionality differences, just sort of keeping up to date with the latest versions of packages and things and making things more robust. So a lot of the asynchronous tasks that have to happen to do with marking are a bit better. I think I've knocked out a lot of race conditions. There's now an installer for Docker, which should make it a lot easier to run the Numbas LTI tool, particularly if you don't have the IT resources to set up and run a Linux server on your own. Docker is a lot more straightforward. And the system for updating code and stuff, there are now tagged branches for the major versions, so it's a lot easier to know exactly what version you're on and how to upgrade. We've taken on a couple more hosting contracts. We at Newcastle run LTI servers for a few institutions now, and we're now in a position to do that a bit more. So if that interests you, talk to us. I published a schema for the exam format that Numbas uses. It's just a formality really, so if you make a tool that interacts with Numbas, that might be worth looking at. My aim for the year was to organise content better, and to do that we've set up a Numbas open resource library. The idea is that people will submit questions or exams into that. They will be moderated. We have a team of people who do the reviews and try and ensure a level of quality and consistency so that when you go to the resource library, you'll know you'll find something that you can probably use. That work is in progress. It's going fairly slowly. I think the tools we need are all there now, and now we need to actually just do the reviewing. I started trying to write up some stuff about the design of Numbas. I said I don't have any requirement to publish formally, but I think it's worth writing down something about the decisions behind how Numbas works and how things were implemented. So I'm picking individual features out of Numbas and trying to write short essays or papers about them. So you can go and have a look at that if you're interested. So this is the first of the new features for the year. There aren't too many new features this year. There's going to be a talk on the programming extension, which I helped with later in this conference. One of the things we needed was a code editor. So I've added the ability for extensions to provide a new kind of input widget, in this case an editing widget, and I think that's going to be very versatile. You can use that for code editors. I'm considering using it for the interactive diagram extensions, and then we're just missing some really common things like drag and drop and hotspot that I think would be good to at least prototype using this before making them proper built-in input methods. Also for programming, we needed the ability to evaluate code, which could take a long time. So not instantly when you press the submit button, which is the assumption for all the other part types. So marking algorithms now have this idea of pre-submit tasks. You can give a list of tasks to do. The marking pauses until those are all finished, they return some results, and then the rest of the marking algorithm runs. Again, that can be used for a lot more stuff than just the programming extension. Maybe, again, if you've got something embedded in the page and you need to communicate with it and check that it's loaded and all that, you can use pre-submit tasks for that. I've written an extension providing some stuff to do with graph theory. We had a third-year graph theory course that wanted to use numbers, so we needed the ability to generate random matrices and draw them, and do a lot of the manipulation and inspection tasks to do with graphs. A lot of the questions for that are published, so you can have a look at those. Before the JSXGraph conference last year, I spent some time improving the JSXGraph extension. There's now a much nicer way of both embedding diagrams, creating them, and interacting with part inputs. So in this video here, I've got a diagram. I can drag the dots around and it fills in that multiple choice, or when I fill in the multiple choice, it moves stuff on the diagram. There's a two-way link, so that's nice. For the open resource library, we needed some tools for submitting stuff and doing the review process, so I've added queues to the editor. The idea is that a user can submit an item to a queue, and then people who are on the list of reviewers can check it against a checklist, like tick things off as they go. There's a comments thread, so you can have a bit of back and forth with a submitter or with other reviewers. And then finally mark something as accepted. So we're going to use that for the resource library, but also we're planning on using that internally, providing a sort of a proof checking service. So anybody at Newcastle will be able to submit questions to our queue, and the Numbas team will have a look at it. And that's available to everyone on the editor as well. So I know a few other people are already doing that. So that's what the the queue review page looks like. You get links to view the item, the checklist, and the comments thread. I tried to add a few helpful features in the editor. I think autocompletion is really helpful. If you can't quite remember the name of a function or exactly what form the parameters should take, so the editor now pops up little autocompletions as you type, which cuts out searching through the documentation. And also it will create entries for variables that you refer to elsewhere in the question, so that you know to fill them in. It's not possible anymore to have a reference to an undefined variable. For next year, I have a few things to think about. I mean, my to-do list, as ever, is incredibly long. The things I would like to look at next year are something to do with showing working out. We have quite a few instances of there's a procedure the student must follow, and it's really an algorithm, so you don't know how many steps it's going to take. And how do you produce a good worked solution for that kind of thing, like describe to the student the steps. So I've done some prototypes around that. Here's an example with showing how to find the cycle decomposition of a permutation. So for each step in the algorithm, sort of produce an annotation which is shown to the student, and they're shown the state of the output at each step as well. slightly less interesting for me, but very important thing is to update the lockdown app. Like for years and years we've been using a bespoke lockdown app at Newcastle that's only available to our students because it's built into our particular setup. We want to make something that's more generic, so we're working on making the app work with the LTI tool. It creates a special link which opens the app. The student has to enter in a password to decrypt the settings for the app, and it then opens up at wherever it needs to be. That will work similarly to the Safe Exam Browser app. We've written our own one because already the main reason is that Safe Exam Browser doesn't run on Android and Linux, and we want to support every device that our students use. But having something specific to Numbas, there might be other reasons that it will be beneficial, or it might be a chaotic task and we go back to Safe Exam Browser. But that's something I'm working on over the summer, and we really want to have this out by the time our next term starts in September 22. Finally, I'm going to try over the next year to encourage more people to contribute code to Numbas, or to work on documentation, or just contribute to the project in more ways. We have a few hundred open issues on GitHub. We are hiring some students over the summer to work on just doing some code, and the e-learning team at Newcastle is growing very slightly as well. It would be really good to have some more contributions from other people. And that's it, a very quick whistle-stop tour of what's happened in Numbas over the last year.